Water pollution is one of the most serious ecological problems we face today. Water pollution is when harmful substances enter bodies of water, which degrades the water quality and renders it toxic for humans. Some of the big contributors of water pollution include agriculture, sewage and wastewater, oil pollution, and radioactive substances. These pollutants can seep and reach through groundwater and surface water, which is the main water we use in our daily lives, and contaminates it. Exposure to water contamination can cause a variety of health issues and can even kill you. Minoritized groups are especially at risk to this issue because they usually live closest to the most polluting sources.
So what's the biology behind the polluted water source? How does it relate to the necessity of environmental justice? Water itself is a resource that can be considered heavily important in any given community. In an article written by the CDC, water is a resource that can support your immune system, lubricate joints, and fortify body temperature. In this image provided by the Great Lakes Now, this map shows the relationship between an increasing colored population and water source condition violations found in those states. As you can see, water population plagues areas much more heavily filled with minority groups than the majority. Living in areas such as these leads to consumption of unhealthy and unclean water. According to the WHO, untreated or mismanaged water sources can lead to higher risk of cholera, diarrhea, dysentery, hepatitis A, typhoid, and polio. Some articles expand on this, such as one written by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, which detail more severe illnesses such as organ failure, nervous system damage, or even chronic diseases like cancer in the long term due to chemical exposure in contaminated water. Based off this info, it just goes to show that the people living in areas with bad water will only face worse living conditions and health conditions as time goes on. The environmental injustice when it comes to water pollution and availability can no longer be ignored, with how many biological and generational risks there are to the average resident.
Minoritized groups in the United States are more heavily impacted by drinking water violations and contaminants. This is a form of environmental racism. Environmental racism is the inequality in which communities of color and low-income communities face a disproportionate risk of exposure to environmental hazards and associated health risks and conditions. Race was found to have the strongest relationship to the length of time an individual lives with drinking water violations. While nearly 130 million people in the United States live with drinking water contamination or similar issues, communities of color are more likely to suffer. Majority Black cities like Flint, Michigan are a primary example. When the city of Flint switches water supply in 2014, lead seeped into the drinking water. Officials were slow to acknowledge the issue and listen to the concerns of residents. According to University of Michigan researcher Paul Mohai, the Flint water crisis is the worst example of environmental racism in recent U.S. history. Of the many forms of environmental justice, in the case of Flint, there was a lack of procedural, corrective, and social justice. In an environmental justice study by Scheider and colleagues, it was found that Hispanic residents tend to have higher concentrations of nitrate in water. Epidemiological evidence suggests that nitrate exposure in drinking waters can lead to an elevated risk of cancer and birth defects. This is directly correlated with a history of disinvestment, residential segregation, and discrimination against people of color in the United States.
Clean Water Action is a grassroots organization that brings the community together to fight against water quality and pollution issues for minoritized groups, specifically how these issues relate to environmental racism. They do this by providing a voice to community members who would otherwise not be able to participate in fighting for water equality. One example of communities benefited by their work is in Michigan. Here, they have recently promoted an initiative for community members to inform legislators about lead contamination. This initiative fights to reduce lead pipe quantities and thus protect families from toxic lead exposure. Additionally, Clean Water Action translates complicated legal jargon into understandable and actionable language, electing legal officials to fight on behalf of Michigan community voices. For example, the Supreme Court recently weakened the historic Clean Water Act. To combat these changes, the Clean Water Act of 2023 has been proposed. Clean Water Action has organized and raised awareness for community members to fight for this new proposal. While the proposal is at a national level, Clean Water Action creates change by providing local communities, like the community in Michigan, the voice and knowledge to contact their congressman to make feasible change.